Toitu te mara tane, toitu te mara tangaroa, toitu te tangata. If the land is well and the sea is well, the people will thrive. Tēnei ka mihi ke te mana wheno o Aotearoa. We acknowledge the local tribal authorities of New Zealand and all other traditional custodians of the lands that you may be joining us from. Tēnā koutou katoa. Hello, everybody. A very warm welcome to you all. My name is Ben Adelberg, and I am based in Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland, New Zealand. I'm the co-founder of the Lentil Intervention, an Australasian advocacy platform disseminating all aspects of planetary health. Our aim is to inspire the adoption of lifestyle changes toward climate-friendly and healthy lifestyle practices and foster resilient communities. It is a New Zealand registered charity and forms the umbrella entity for the following 3 programs. Available on all popular podcasting platforms, the Lentil Intervention podcast hosts conversations with leading scientists, researchers, academics, health experts, PhD students, and other industry leaders, guests local to Australia and New Zealand, with the occasional exception, focusing on issues and bringing awareness to our most pressing and relevant challenges on our corner of the globe. The first of the community initiatives that fall under the Lentil Intervention is Sports Gear Revived. Established 12 years ago to run alongside my endurance sports coaching business, Kaitiaki Endurance Sports, Sports Gear Revived collects and redistributes unwanted sports clothing, shoes, and equipment to schools and groups within low socioeconomic and high deprivation communities of the Waikato and Northland regions of New Zealand. In doing so, we're enabling more to participate in sports, thereby enjoying the associated health and social benefits, immersing in nature, and creating better environmental awareness. And the other community initiative is Athletes for Nature, a movement of not just athletes, but outdoor enthusiasts that realize the importance of changing their behavior in a way that will positively impact nature. Katiakitanga is the Māori process and practice of conserving the environment, and as athletes, we are well primed to care about nature as this is our playground. There are 12 action steps that members can undertake. These have been created and will continue to evolve over time by our community. The goal for Athletes for Nature is to grow this community so we can inspire more outdoor enthusiasts, coaches, event organizers, and sponsors to incorporate more ethical and climate-friendly policies and behaviors. Membership to Athletes for Nature is irrespective of the sport code and the individual's affiliation to a particular club, group, or entity. No barriers, one community, irrespective of their background. And a big thank you to the sponsor of this webinar series, Pathfinder. Pathfinder is an ethical KiwiSaver that selects companies generating positive benefits and returns. To ensure that we provide no barriers to access to valuable sessions like these, they have supported this series. It is an absolute privilege to kick off our very first Athletes for Nature webinar series with someone I hugely admire and respect, as do many others, Dr. Mike Joy. Our most regular guest on the podcast, Mike is recognized in New Zealand as a leading freshwater ecologist and ardent advocate for the preservation of our waterways. Mike is the Morgan Foundation Senior Research Fellow in Freshwater Ecology at the School of Geography, Environment and Earth Sciences at Te Herenga Waka, Victoria University of Wellington. His latest publication is a 264-page memoir titled The Fight for Freshwater, which is due to be published in June, so you can pre-order a copy on the Bridget Williams Books website. He has received several prestigious awards recognizing not only his research contribution, but also his highly effective communication of science. His most recent accolade, received late last year, the Callahan Medal, was for his research on the decline of freshwater ecosystems, the quality of drinking water, and sustainable management of our freshwater ecosystems and food production, and for communicating the science to inform public opinion on these issues. Dr. Mike Joy.
All right, so this is the title. It could have many titles, but I think this is kind of a general outline of some of the things that I've been working on lately, including freshwater, my kind of work with the degrowth Aotearoa in New Zealand. So that's where the degrowth imperative bit comes into it here. But really, I guess that if I clash with anybody at the moment, it seems to be with economists and I think this little saying here, anyone who believes in indefinite growth of anything physical on a physically finite planet is either a madman or an economist. Kind of sums up my frustrations with dealing with these people, and I guess my frustration also that these are the people that the government turns to. You don't see many ecologists being asked to be involved in government policy setting. It's generally they go straight to the economists for the advice, which is why we're in the trouble we're in, I think. Okay, so let's see if this thing's going to change. Yes, I really do recommend Tom Murphy. He's got a website, Do the Math. You can see it there, but just just seems to be able to cut through a whole lot of the bullshit there is out there at the moment. And he's an astrophysicist, a very smart guy who's kind of come from that highly academic area into some very realistic kind of communication with people through this website. And I love this saying here about the real value of Earth and its organisms, and how our annual economy is this minuscule thing that, like the flea on the dog, and yet our decisions are always about maximizing the short-term gain for the flea, as if that's all that matters. They sort of completely miss the point that without the dog, the flea doesn't have any worth. And I think that sums it up beautifully. And I don't want to say all economists are like that, but this seems to be the ones that are in our public service seem to be pretty much fit into that. Um, so how I got to that degrowth kind of idea is that we will degrow in the very near future. The growth trajectory that we're on, powered by fossil fuels, is coming to an end, and we have to face the fact that that's going to happen. The choice for us now is whether we manage our way down or we just wait for it to hit. And we're up against a huge industry of PR and marketing and advertising that is determined to keep business as usual, and make sure that people don't understand this reality. Very few people are talking about it. And amazing that a young woman like Greta Thunberg comes out as a true leader in amongst thousands, tens of thousands of supposed leaders who don't lead at all. But I just want to emphasize now, in case I forget to say it later on, that a world with much less consumption is not a bad thing. It's not like it's portrayed to be some terrible end of the world thing, but actually be a nicer place than what we have at the moment. So but I'll just go and kind of talk to some of these numbers. Just talking about the limits to growth work that was done back in the 70s, and these trajectories here for a whole lot of things, as you can see on this graph, and that kind of grey window that has actually come right out to 2030 now. I just haven't updated this graph, but these lines that were predicted by this model, and this is the business as usual model, have turned out to be amazingly accurate for predictions that were made back in the 70s. And this is kind of the time of major change that we're in at the moment. There you can see some of those lines. Really worth taking a look at the limits to growth. This is again from Tom, his death by hockey sticks graphs, but all of these things, going back, most of them 1,000 years, and back to the year 1000, and then looking at these growth rates and changes of all of these things. You see these massive declines in forest and wild animals, and then the massive increase in all of the consumption that we do, including CO2 emissions. All these warnings coming from scientists that don't seem to be they barely make it into page 10 on the newspaper, if at all, and in the background somewhere. And when scientists are so conservative that when they start saying things like this, catastrophic biodiversity loss, untold amounts of human misery, you know that there is really something going on, and we should be taking notice. I do want to mention the fact that what does make it into the public discourse and most of the news coverage that is around carbon emissions and climate change, but really important to understand that it's not a problem that needs solving, climate change. It's a predicament. It's a symptom along with all of these, and this is just a subset of the existential crises that are coming at us, and all have the same cause and all have the same cure, and that is they're caused by too much growth, exceeding planetary boundaries, overshoot, overconsumption, and the answer to all of them is to massively reduce the levels of consumption that we have. We have these limits to growth. So the planetary boundaries on the left, we're starting to see incredible heat waves around the planet, much, much warmer than even the models, even the scariest models were predicting. And coming back to that kind of food idea and what's driving these planetary boundaries, this is one of the shots of the planetary boundaries before they had. There's still a few missing in this paper because it was done back in 2014. But the thing to notice here is those black dots, and what that means is the black dots are animal agriculture. So these are how much of these planetary boundaries exceedances are driven by animal agriculture. And that little kind of cluster there of agriculture, aquaculture, fishing and forestry, AAF, much more dependent on fossil fuels than ever before. So back in the 70s, it was 43% driven dependent on fossil fuels, and it's up to 62% now. 68% of the terrestrial surface of the planet is covered up by those things. 22% of greenhouse gas emissions coming from them. And in the last 2 decades, just a massive growth in everything, including animal-based food products, which contributed 95% of the global increase in food greenhouse gas emissions. So really driven by animal agriculture. Just a reminder, just I guess for people who are watching tonight will probably know this, but this kind of idea that New Zealand is clean and green couldn't be further from the truth. You can see our overshoot day for planetary boundaries for us was in April the 19th was when we exceeded the capacity of the planet. And so from April 19th on, right through, so now we're well into it. We're in deficit. So it's just like on the 19th of April, your credit card went into negative, and from now on to the rest of the year, everything you spend is going to be ramping up a debt on your credit card. Only it's worse than that because the debt is being loaded onto your children and your children's children. We're just loading this debt so we can live like we do now onto the future. Sorry, my throat's a bit croaky. The environmental performance indicators, we just published a paper on this, but this is back less than a decade ago, and New Zealand there on that map made it onto the graphic because it was one of the 20 worst countries in the world. Of 189 countries, we were among the 20 worst based on a proportional composite environmental performance rank. It was based on water quality, marine captures, biodiversity loss. We score so badly there because we have the highest rates of biodiversity loss in the world, and the highest proportion of threatened species, I mean. And so the 18th there is 18th from the worst, and that was per capita, but even overall we're about 38 or something from the worst of the 189 countries when you take into account total. We're seeing, and this is just the manifestations of that limits to growth stuff that I talked about, but animal communities, animals disappearing off the planet, freshwater, especially lots of humans in bad space as well. It's not just the animals, and that huge. The little graphic, little cartoon of the bug squished on the windows. For those of us old enough to remember what it used to be like driving in New Zealand, where you'd have to clean the radiator out because of all the bugs that were squished in there and squished on the windscreen. You hardly see it. It's hardly an issue at all now. and that graphic on the right just showing the massive increase in the number of animals on the planet, and this has been made possible by using fossil fuel derived fertilizers to increase production on the land. But that massive change in the proportions there, where humans and the animals we eat make up 97% of the biomass of animals on the planet. Total animal biomass has increased 700% since industrialization. So that's just, bringing fossil fuels in to up that. That the biggie for New Zealand, and that pushed up that production, is synthetic nitrogen. It's now we create more nitrogen in the nitrogen cycle, make a more available nitrogen than is produced by natural systems, and that was back in 2008. So we're way above it now. And the Science Foundation, I mean, this kind of thing, I don't think it ever makes the news, or nobody seems to know about this stuff, but represents perhaps the greatest single experiment in global geoengineering that humans have ever made. I would say probably releasing carbon into the atmosphere would be the same. Tied up with that is nitrous oxide, which is 300 times more global warming potential than carbon dioxide. So nitrous oxide, and that is increasing as we add synthetic nitrogen fertilizer. And so that concentration in the atmosphere has gone up by 123% since pre-industrial. You can see it shooting up there, nitrous oxide as well as carbon in the atmosphere. We see it here in New Zealand in our rivers with this really intensive agriculture, mostly dairy. We have a massive increase in the amount of fertilizer used, 1,300% increase in nitrous oxide emissions since 1990. And in our rivers, you can see on my little graph there, where this is from a paper we published a couple of years ago showing the flux of nitrogen in our rivers and comparing it globally. And you'll see that we're up there. We got the Yangtze, the Yellow, and then the Selwyn and Ashburton in South Canterbury, which is south of Christchurch, the Manawatu River, Korean rivers, Waikato River, and then the Baltic, Mississippi, and the Thames. And the Mississippi is considered by most to be one of the most polluted, nutrient polluted rivers in the world, and you can see we beat them easily. And we have this kind of extremes where we have 1 billion people on inadequate and insecure diets, basically starving at one end, and 2.1 billion at the other end, obese or overweight from the move to these highly processed foods. And this crazy situation where our food has gone from pre-industrialization being net energy positive, and obviously it would have to be. You couldn't spend more energy getting your food than you got back from it, because you wouldn't survive for very long at all. But now we have the situation because of fossil fuels, where we put 10 to 33 units of fossil energy in to get 1 unit of energy out. And this crazy transporting of food all around the globe, and even around New Zealand as well. And so you get this kind of situation here where that's the energy going in to our food on the left, and that's the energy that's in our food. That's why we eat food, is to power our metabolism. So you can see that energy output, a tiny proportion of what's going in. And so as well as kind of messing up the future, we're eating the past. So our food systems exceeded those boundaries, and it's harming the atmosphere, water, and land. We're eating the past. What could we change in our food systems to feed the current population? And our world as we know it is utterly dependent on fossil energy. And the idea is that we can replace it. We can just switch from replace that carbon leakage system to some kind of carbon-free energy system. And so I wanted to talk about that, if I could. I'm just going to check that chat in case there's something I need to know about. No, that's good. All right, so just some of this, just wanted to touch on this carbon zero, or just some reality around our energy situation. And so a lot of people don't realize this, but electricity is a very small part. Most people, when you talk about energy, they think of electricity, but it's only a small part of what happens. And if you look at energy fossil fuels versus renewable, and this is per capita on this graph here. So what it's showing is that that tiny little green, there's biomass, that the green line at the very bottom, that's basically wood, burning wood, and then you got this hydro and other renewables, that little sliver that's going along there, but really the massive proportion is coal, oil, and gas, and going up so much faster than we're adding renewables. I know that lots of New Zealanders will tell me that, but we're 80% renewable energy here. They read all about it and they think that so we're all good here because it's 80% renewable. No, that's not true, because electricity is a small part of our energy use, and actually it's 28% of our total energy use here that's renewable. Here's a graph from, I can't remember which government department, but I've got the link there. So that red line shows the proportion of renewable energy in our total energy consumption. And it's sitting around 28% at the moment, or it was in 2021. And the scary thing is that it basically hasn't changed since 1990, since this record began. There's been a few squiggles in that line there, but basically we are unchanged on 28% renewable energy in our total energy consumption. So, a reality check that all of that renewable that you see around, all of those wind turbines and solar farms and solar panels and all of the hype around renewable energy, and sure, it's being added, but it's not displacing anything. All we're doing is adding to our energy consumption. So that there's no energy that's happening. What's going wrong with my microphone? Oh, hopefully that'll come right. There's and this is a really interesting. That sign's going to go away. Graph here, looking at per capita energy use in New Zealand going back to the year 1959, which is when I was born, and look at that increase. It's nearly trebled in my lifetime, the per capita energy use in New Zealand. That's why adding all this renewable isn't getting us anywhere, because as fast as we add it, we increase our consumption. And it's not just, of course, if you look at house sizes and car sizes and everything that we kind of take for granted has grown massively over that time as well. So just to get into that energy issue a bit more, I wanted to just talk about energy density. It's a really important thing to understand and to kind of get your head around how this transition might happen from historically it was biomass. Then we found hydrocarbons. We found coal, and then the things like oil. Can we move to a world without fossil fuels that looks a lot like it is today? And to understand that, we need to think about power density or energy density. So there's just plotting energy density of a whole bunch of things that we see around. It's plotted on the y-axis. You've got megajoules per liter. On the x-axis, we've got megajoules per kilogram. So it's basically the weight of the energy or the volume of the energy. And the little circle at the top here, which is all of the things that we fly our jets with and power our trains and our cars and all of the kind of things that we take for granted, right up there in that top circle. And then you've got coal and hydrogen and compressed natural gas, coming down towards that bottom corner. And there's where you have batteries. And this is how you can understand, looking at this, why we're never going to be able to fly big jets around the world powered on electricity. The energy density of those batteries is really, really small. And just think about, my little Corolla, I could fill up the tank on that and it would weigh 60 kgs and I could drive from here to Northland. 60 kg battery, even the best lithium battery might get me, I don't know, at most 100 k's, probably a lot less than that. So that's that, just to give you an idea of the importance of that energy density. And so the high energy dense fuels are right up there in that circle that powers everything that we skip around the world in. And you'll see that there's nothing up there that's not fossil fuels, except biodiesel and vegetable oil. But really important to understand that, yes, they have high energy density, but the energy return on energy invested for them, which I'll come to soon, is really, really poor. You put as much energy into making those things as you get out of them. So you might as well just burn the fossil fuels and save all the land and all of the processes and materials involved in that. But I'll come back to that. The other thing to understand is just how oil is just, we just take it for granted. We have no idea. So I just wanted to give, and you can look this up on YouTube, and I'm sure if any of you have been to my talks, you've seen me talk about this before. But this guy here, a massive Olympic track cyclist, who gets on this dynamo cycle machine here, and it's hooked up to a toaster. And what he does is he pedals like crazy. Somebody pops the toaster down. He pedals till he almost falls off the bike. He's producing 697 watts. If any of you set your exercycle or your rowing machine to watts, will realize that's an incredible output. Most of us can do 100, 150 or something like that. And he pedals until he falls off that bike, and then you pull the toast out, and it's just slightly brown. That's just showing how much we take for granted. It's flicking a switch on and that energy that's there. And if we convert it to human energy, then it gives us some kind of idea of just what we're kind of taking for granted. And then if you extend that out to the global economy, it needed 17 trillion watts of energy, and 80% of that coming from oil. So if you convert that to human workers, that's 500 billion human workers worth of energy that the 8 billion of us run on. And so if you kind of contrast that, there's about 4 billion real workers on the planet. So 500 and energy slaves that we have, and versus 4 billion real ones. So that works out to about 70 for every human on the planet. But many humans don't have any of them, and the rich countries, places like New Zealand, we have about 200 energy slaves each. And if you work it out, if the price that we pay for that energy, if you were paying workers, that would be about 1 cent an hour that we pay them. So like if you think of my little Corolla and its tank of gas might cost me $100. I've got the equivalent of 4.5 years worth of work of a human. I bought myself a slave who worked constantly for me and doesn't have to be fed or housed for $100. I get him for 4.5 years, or 180 odd people pushing my car along the road as an equivalent. And so when you sort of look around in the car in the traffic jam and you see all these people with scowls on their faces, I just want to scream at them. They just don't know how lucky they are to be born in this time where you can pack 180 slaves into the back of your car and drive around for $100. It's so incredibly cheap. It's unbelievable. And yet we have to get away from that in a hurry. So this is what I touched on before, this energy return on energy invested. And I spoke about it with food, but basically everything we do, like if this leopard in the example here doesn't catch that warthog and runs and runs and runs and doesn't catch anything to eat, obviously it's going to die. It has to get more back. It has to be a positive, and it has to be more than just slightly positive. It has to have time to do the other things in life that you need, like sleeping and other kind of making nests or doing whatever else we have to do, building houses. You have to have excess energy. So you need a really strongly positive energy return on investment to get by. And when we first discovered oil, it did have a very high energy return on investment. The first, even in Taranaki, you just kind of make a hole in the ground and the oil comes bubbling up out of it. So we had this the energy return on investment, back in those days was around 100. So on this little graph on the right here, it's showing energy return on investment. And so the net of energy available to society back in 1995 was right up there, close to 100, and then you see it slipping down to 200. 1995 to 2001 is the EROI up there, and then the final ERI is after you take into account all of these things, and you see it starting to slide down and slide down. I think the last estimate was that the average energy return on energy invested for oil globally is down to about 15 now. So that's 15 barrels of oil for every barrel of oil that you put in, you get 15 back again, and it's dropping really, really fast. And so this is just kind of plotting those two things against each other, the energy return on investment and plotted against the energy that's kind of in that. So the size of the bubble is how much volume of that material that we have, kind of just a graphic of that. So you can see down on that very, very bottom corner there, you've got biodiesel with a very, very low energy return on investment and not much of it. And you can see the blue bubbles, and that's how fast the energy return on investment is coming down for oil. Got coal and hydro and wind turbines and solar panels there as well. But we're getting right down into the tough stuff now, where the energy returns are pretty low. And it kind of gets us into this loop where the energy that we use to dig up the things that we're going to make these renewables energies out of is declining, and then we've got the increased cost as those materials get rarer. I'll try and show that further on. But so we've got the energy return on investment is kind of wherever it's at the moment when it comes to all these renewables, it's going to be going down, and it's going down because we have to put more and more energy into getting it. That's also declining. I think these pyramids here are probably the easiest way to kind of describe it. So the resource pyramid for energy, and so we're looking at, in this case, this kind of upside down pyramid here, showing over time we've gone from that onshore, easy to extract liquid oil, working our way down to shallow liquid onshore, ultra deep water. We're having to go into the deep ocean now to find oil, into the Arctic to drill for oil, and then you've got shale fracking and tar sands, where you get into the point where you're putting more energy in to get that oil than you get out of it, which seems crazy, but because there's lots of investment in it and there's lots of subsidies for it, then we keep on doing it regardless. But the killer, if that wasn't bad enough, you've got this other the conundrum there where it's the reverse, or it's the same thing, but up the other way, where the materials that we need to build these renewables, and copper is a really good example for, because we're going to electrify things, everything we do to switch from fossil fuels and energy, like gas and diesel powered trucks and things, is all going to require copper for the grid, copper for the motors, copper for the wind turbines, for getting the power from the turbines to each other, and the concentration of copper and all of these metals is declining. So when this is just looking at the cutoff grade for copper since we've been mining that. So it used to be 20%, and it's now down to 0.1%. So we just have to work harder and harder and harder and dig up more and more material to get that same amount of copper. Looking at copper now globally, the metal, the resource to rock, the metal to rock ratio for copper is now on average 513. That means that for every ton of copper that you get, you have to dig up 513 tons of material and move it and process it and put it back into a tailings dam or something like that. And that just that multiplier gets bigger and bigger all the time, and the energy available to us to do that goes in the other direction. So this is just making it harder and harder and harder all the time. And the graphic that's moving down the bottom there is just trying to gives some kind of indication of what happens to the economy as that energy return on investment goes down. So the more you'll see those, the thing to watch is the orange arrow going out to the right, the discretionary. That's how much money, spare money, is left for society. Obviously, as more of that purple arrow going up and around to the left, more and more money, more and more energy going in to get the energy means that you squeeze that discretionary because the necessary amount of energy doesn't change. So the only thing that can give up, that can go there, is the spare money in the economy. And you can see that getting squeezed. It's just an inevitable outcome of having to put more and more energy back. And you can see there's lots of work showing that is happening already. The thing that's getting me really fired up these days is the self-delusion industry, and I'm kind of running out of time. I want to kind of get going on this stuff, and so I'll skip through this. But I just want to get some reality around this thing called net zero, that we seem to be putting all of our eggs in the basket of net zero, and we need to be carbon zero, not zero, net zero. I'm going to explain that. We've got to mistrust and learn to understand that green growth can't happen, and there's bright green and dark green lies around that. The magic energy solutions that are just lies, and this idea of carbon capture and storage. So net zero is a dangerous illusion, and it's dangerous because if we kid ourselves that we can, plant a tree, we can still fly to London because we can plant some trees, then what it means is it gives us the option to kind of ease our consciences and keep on burning fossil fuels in the belief that we're mitigating it, we're balancing it, when really it's not real at all. It's completely delusional. And also this energy transition, of course, every part of this energy transition, solar panels, wind turbines, everything we talk about are all made from fossil fuels. I'll skip through this stuff here, but then this idea of energy efficiency too, you've got to understand the idea of Jevons paradox, where you can make things more and more efficient, but overall you're worse off. So just to go through some of these options that we have here. So I've got this little graphic on the left here. It actually came from Simon Michaud, but basically the size of those boxes there, with the oil, gas, coal, hydro, nuclear, wind, and solar, some feeding into direct energy and some into electricity. They're basically the ratio, the size of them is comparable to the proportion in our total energy mix at the moment. So then we're going to have to get rid of those ones, right, for climate change reasons. The oil, gas, and coal's got to go. So what have we got left? In my I don't know how to get rid of this thing here. It's in the way. Oh, there we go. So for hydro, most of the rivers that could be dammed are dammed, and there's huge environmental. I mean, I've done lots of my research career has been around the impacts of hydro on our rivers and ecology of our rivers, plus the geomorphology of them. Plus, it turns out that if we create dams, whether they're for pumped hydro or actual hydro storage dams, we have methane emissions from them, meaning that for at least 10 years of a new dam, any gains from that renewable energy are wiped out by the methane emissions by the lake and the buried material in the lake that breaks down anaerobically and gives off methane. We've got nuclear energy, of course, and it's always there in the background, but it's very expensive compared to anything else, and very slow to build, and there are still unsolved waste issues with that. Wind, big installation, environmental material footprint costs there. Solar, a large material footprint as well. And the trouble with wind and solar is they're intermittent. So and some other issues that I'll talk about, but they're not renewable. The energy's renewable, but the infrastructure is rebuildable and needs to be rebuilt over and over again. But biofuels, as I said, the EROI on them are break even or negative, and hydrogen is not a source of energy. It's a very inefficient way of transferring energy. And of course, they're all dependent on fossil fuels. And this is from some of Simon Michaud's work. Plus, we just don't have the materials needed to be able to do this transition. Because we've got this thing, and these are all per capita, these graphs here, so population growth, energy consumption that I talked about, and the per capita energy use and the consumption, and plus all the materials that have to go into these things. And so then, this is Simon Michaud's work, but so much other work showing just the incredible amount of materials that are needed. And you need to understand that these replacements have very in comparison to what we have at the moment, they have big material footprints. So, for example, we got talk of this offshore wind farm off Taranaki, and they're talking about putting 54 wind turbines out there. And I want you to look at that the lower part of the graph on the right there. Each offshore turbine needs 8 tons of copper per megawatt. The average one of these big turbines they want to put out there is 7.4 megawatts. So that's 59, so just under 60 tons of copper needed for each turbine. And it's not just the copper in the turbine, it's because you have to connect them all up, and they're at low voltage before you get them on shore, and so you need cables as thick as your leg in copper to be able to join all these things up. So to put that 54 in, you're going to need more than 3,000 tons of copper that would be needed. And that rock to metal ratio that I talked about of 513, and that's going up all the time. You're going to have to dig up a massive amount of material to make that copper. Here's some examples here. Just don't need to look too closely, but all of those, this is about the density of copper globally, and you see those lines all declining. So the density, copper's just getting rarer and rarer, so you're having to dig more and more to get to it. And so when you compare, so that, for our example of the offshore Taranaki wind turbine field there, you would need a massive amount of copper. 1.6 million tons of earth would have to be mined to get the copper for them. And there's the modeling that's been done by MB is that there's 10,000 megawatts of potential onshore wind, because onshore is, you can see in that graph down on the bottom right there, is high in materials as well. And there's so roughly 3 tons of copper a megawatt for onshore. So that's 30,000 tons of copper, which would mean 15 million tons of material to be mined to be able to build those wind turbines. So it's just very hard for me to kind of accept that people are going to run around saying this is clean energy and talk about, and what will happen is that we don't actually need the electricity. So what they'll do is just replace, they'll come up with things to use it for, like hydrogen, or put in these data centers and things like that. They'll create a market for them. And so so you can see in that graph, and this is tons of material per terawatt, but just to show, nuclear's low, then solar's higher, wind's higher, hydro, and then the sort of things that we have at the moment in New Zealand, like gas, much lower. So I'm not saying we should keep burning gas. What I'm saying is, if you want to replace what we have now and not reduce energy consumption, you have to realize that you're going to need at least 10 times more material per unit of energy than what we have at the moment. And that just doesn't, it's not going to compute. I'll just skip through this. This is just like showing just how much area it takes as well. And I guess the thing that I've kind of come to that you have to think about is, okay, so say if we did find this magic new energy source that had no greenhouse gas emissions, that had no harmful emissions, no problems whatsoever with it, would we be better off? When I think about it, every one of those from my first or second slide where I showed all of those other existential crises that we have, they all come from having too much energy. Having too much free energy has allowed us to fish out the oceans and destroy all the soils and do all of those other crazy things. So, I think just be wary of what you wish for if you want to keep continuing that energy supply, because I think that just we won't make it, but trying to make it will push us over the edge. This kind of crazy idea that we can replace this 100 years worth of effort to build this complex industrial ecosystem, and we had cheap and abundant oil to do that. The most an energy dense energy supply that we know of to build up this system, and we had unlimited resources, and we think we're going to be able to replace this with something that needs 10 times more material. And we have, at this time when we have declining energy return on investment for fossil fuels, declining mineral densities, unprecedented human growth. So this is just talking about replacing what we have, and in fact we're just growing our consumption all the time, and we've got this planetary boundaries being exceeded all over the place, and the conflicts that are happening over all these resources as well, just the impossibility of that situation. So if we don't focus on reducing consumption and energy waste and fixate on replacing fossil fuels with these so-called replaceable renewable energies, then we're simply swapping one race to destruction with another race to destruction. Net zero, this idea that we can offset our emissions by sequestering carbon and planting trees is just bizarre. Just think about it. Every tree that gets planted in New Zealand, this country was forested, and in the last 1,000 years. So you plant a tree, there was already a tree there, but somebody's chopped it down. So every tree that you plant in New Zealand doesn't, we need to plant them because we chop trees down and that carbon went into the atmosphere. So for a million reasons, we need to plant those trees, and there are a million good things about trees, but they do not offset fossil carbon, because fossil carbon is alien carbon. It's not part of the carbon cycle. If you just think about it, the carbon cycle was at a sort of a dynamic equilibrium before we added fossil fuels. So forget, say, pre-fossil fuels, and we chopped a whole lot of trees down, and we started off global warming through chopping trees down, then we could plant all those trees back, and then we would solve the problem. What we're doing at the moment is we've added this other carbon source, which is the 65 million year old at least fossil carbon, which is from another cycle completely. So there's no way we can offset that with trees. And it's the same for soils or whatever you want to talk about. And I've gone through the numbers for our forests, and it's just impossible. And just you can look for this article on The Conversation, where I've explained it in detail, and I've got all of those. I've got all the references there for it. And we're getting to the end of time, so I will skip through to the end. Obviously, I've got too much here. It's just this crazy idea that we can offset emissions is just we're just deluding ourselves. Anyway, so obviously I had way too much stuff here. And so just to remind you that climate crisis is just one symptom of overshoot. We've got all these other existential crises. We're all interconnected, and this magic energy transition is not going to happen because of material limits, energy return on investment declining, the energy needed to mine it, the emissions of the extra energy that we need, and the land area limits as well. And so we come back to this little graph on the right here, where we're right in the middle of this crazy kind of world that was given to us by this fossil fuels, and we don't know any other life because it's all we've known, it's all our parents have known, is this growth. And so somehow we have to face the reality of not being able to live with this kind of level of consumption. It's just not going to happen. And we have to, in the rich world, we have to massively reduce our consumption. Half of New Zealanders are in the top 10% of consumption. So the top 50% of wealth in New Zealand puts us in the top 10% globally. And we are the ones responsible for most of the harm. So anyway, I will stop sharing and see if anybody's still there after a rant like that.
Thank you so much, Mike. Hugely insightful as always. I just want to add that, as I've mentioned, you've been a regular guest on the podcast. For those that want to deep dive a little bit more, we've had varying conversations, not just on degrowth principles, but more also on our food system here in New Zealand and fresh water. So go to the podcast and just type in Mike Joy, and you'll see all of those episodes. Mike has also made reference to Associate Professor Simon Michel, who's an expert in metals and minerals and so on. We've had a fascinating interview with him. So again, go to the podcast, and there's an hour longer, I think hour and a half discussion with Simon, and actually it's on the YouTube as well with all his PowerPoint presentation. So certainly go a bit into the.
Yeah, I mean, I know there's a huge amount of stuff there, and it's I probably put too much effort into wanting to back up everything I'm talking about with graphs and things like that. I could simplify it a lot just to talk to it, but there's always this feeling that people want to this. I've got bookshelves and bookshelves full of papers that I've read to come up with these numbers and things. So yeah, it's a tricky space to try and simplify it enough that you can kind of not lose people, but still have that academic rigor behind it.
Mike, we were chatting offline about the frustration that we both feel, that the false hope that is still sold globally on the fact that renewable energy will solve everything. You've gone into depth with that, but as a takeaway, something maybe more of an action for a lot of our attendees today, our listeners, especially for those of us in New Zealand, what could be potentially a key focus? You've spoken about reducing our consumption, but that's quite generic consumption across a lot of things. What would be a key area that for New Zealand in particular, we should perhaps be paying more attention to?
I think, what do you mean from an individual point of view? Like, yeah, well, I mean, I think that clearly first thing is reducing or getting rid of meat out of the diet, starting with ruminant meat. And when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions and the harm done to the land and that kind of thing, we can't do much about, our big issue is dairy, and only a tiny proportion of that is eaten in this country. So we really can't affect much there. That's just this crazy situation where we produce all this dairy to dry with coal and then ship off around the world for junk food and breast milk, infant formula replacement, breast milk replacement. So yeah, I think there's those lifestyle choices and transport particularly, and so getting rid of meat, thinking about not things like staycations and not just assuming that you can travel around the world just on a whim to go for a holiday and that kind of thing. We have to be really thinking about that. And I think it's thinking about our kids. It's thinking about the future. It's how you can kind of bring it home to yourself. The need to do it is it's not for you. It's for your kids. It's for their kids. To give them a future. Because at the moment, the way we live, because we're so used to it, it's really hard to see this, but the way we live is actually absolutely crazy. The things that we take for granted. So it's not where we have to be that's radical. It's where we are at the moment that's radical. But yeah, it's hard to kind of get that point across when we're used to it. But just looking at that lifetime thing for me, that so I could really severely cut my energy use to get back to it where it was when I was a kid. 1/3 of my energy consumption at the moment, and I can promise you that it wasn't that bad. This kind of idea that there's something terrible about how life was then. I think in those days, one car per family was a lot. Not all families even had a car, let alone more than one car. If you look at the area of house per person, it was some tiny fraction of what it is now. The gadgets in the house, all of the things that we're kind of marketed and convinced that we couldn't live without now have really big footprints. And I guess I was spoiled. I think we touched on this in another discussion, but I had that amazing opportunity to spend 3 months in the subantarctic islands, or over 2 months, where we had we had one bottle of LPG gas amongst 4 to 6 of us, and that was our only energy source, and life was amazing without all that stuff. No internet, not even any radio or any technology. Planes don't even fly over down there. You're just in this world. And so, I mean, I was so lucky to have that glimpse of, and plus with my sailing, going back to basics when you're away sailing, is that it's just important to remember that having all this stuff in our lives, and to the point where, the thing that cracks me up is that one of the biggest growth industries in New Zealand and other wealthy countries is storage. People have got so much shit they can't even fit it all in their houses, so they hire out garages and things like that. These storage centers to store all their stuff. So I mean, it can't be natural that. I mean, I know there's kind of an inbuilt sort of innate need to collect stuff, that probably has some sort of psychological reason from evolutionary reasons, but it's got to be marketing and advertising that convinces us that we need all this stuff now.